welcome to my channel. Today we are going to continue with our lecture on the hypothalamus. Now, we were able to establish that the hypothalamus is a diencephalic structure, and of course it lies in front of the thalamus, or we can say that the hypothalamus is anterior to the thalamus and it is actually posterior to the optic chiasma. It is actually superior to the interpedicular fossa and also superior to the tuber siderum. Now let's quickly draw some of the structures that are located in the diencephalon and that are related to the hypothalamus. This is the pons, this is the medulla oblongata, this is the midbrain, this is cerebellum, and this is the fourth ventricle. Now let's assume that you're here and you move up a little bit upward, and then when you move upward, you get to a region, and it's actually an opening that is called the cerebral aqueduct of Sylvius. And then from the cerebral aqueduct of Sylvius, you get to the third ventricle. Now let's assume that you're the third ventricle. By the side of the third ventricle, you have the thalamus, and then we have another one here. And then there's a structure that connects the two thalami, right? That structure is called the interthalamic adhesion. It is called the interthalamic adhesion. And then, of course, in our thalamus we have the internal medullary lamina. Now, behind the thalamus, we have the epithalamus. We have the epithalamus, right? We also have the abenula around this area. We have the abenula around this area, and they are connected by what is called the habenula commissure. By the side of the thalamus, we have two swellings, one at the medial aspect and then one at the lateral part. One is lateral to this other one. Now this one that is lying medial is called the medial geniculate body. The medial geniculate body is actually implicated in audition. The lateral, this other one is called the lateral geniculate body, and it is implicated in vision. Below the thalamus, we have a structure that is called the subthalamus. Then, in front of the third ventricle, let me clean this. In front of the third ventricle, we have the hypothalamus. This area is known as our hypothalamus. It lies anterior to the third ventricle, and it lies anterior and inferior to the thalamus. Now, from this diagram, we have been able to establish that the diencephalon consists of the thalamus, the subthalamus, the epithalamus. Now, the epithalamus consists of the pineal body, the habenula and the habenula commission. And then we have the metathalamus. The metathalamus consists of the lateral geniculate body. Of course, the lateral geniculate body is implicated in vision. And then we have the medial geniculate body that is involved in audition. Also, we have the hypothalamus as part of the diencephalon. Now, the hypothalamus lies at the ventral part of the diencephalon. And of course, it is anterior and inferior to the thalamus. Now, if you look at the hypothalamus, you also know that it has two swelling, one that lies bilaterally, which is called the mammillary body, and then we have the median eminence. Actually, we have what we call the tuber cinerum that gives rise to the median eminence, and then from the median eminence we have what is called the infundibulum, and then from the infundibulum we now have what is called the pituitary gland. We actually have the posterior pituitary and the anterior pituitary. Now, embryologically, the posterior pituitary actually originates from the third ventricle. It is actually an evagination from the third ventricle. And then the anterior pituitary is actually an evagination from the nasopharynx. In fact, it actually originates from what is referred to as Radke's pouch. Now, anteriorly, we have what is referred to as the optic chiasma arising from the optic nerve. This is our optic chiasma. Now, the optic chiasma actually gives rise to the optic tract that moves down to the lateral geniculate body, and the same thing happens here. These are medial geniculate body, and this is the lateral geniculate body. So the optic tract comes here to the lateral geniculate body. So this is our optic nerve. This is the optic tract, and then this is the lateral geniculate body. I've mentioned that before. And then this is our optic chiasma. So from this diagram, you will observe that the hypothalamus is posterior to the optic chiasma, and then it lies anterior to the thalamus and the third ventricle. And of course, it's also inferior to the thalamus. Now, let's draw another structure. Now, from this structure, this is our corpus callosum. This is our corpus callosum. And then, this is the thalamus. This is the pineal body. This is the habenula. This is the fourth ventricle. This is the optic chiasma. This is what is called the lateral terminalis. This is anterior commissure. And then this is called our the tuba cinerum. And then from here we have the medial eminence. And then we have the infundibulum. The medial eminence. This is the infundibulum. And this is the pituitary gland. Of course, this is the anterior pituitary, and this is the posterior pituitary. Now, from this diagram, of course, this is subthalamus. This is subthalamus. And then we also have another structure here called we call it the hypothalamic sulcus. It extends from the interventricular foramen of Monro, and then it goes down to the cerebral aqueduct of Sylvius. The interventricular foramen actually connects the lateral ventricle with the third ventricle. And of course, we are expected to have our lateral ventricle here. And then it is connected to the third ventricle. Now, the hypothalamus actually lies in this region. And that is to say that the hypothalamus is actually anterior to the hypothalamic sulcus, which separates the hypothalamus from the thalamus. And of course, we can say that it is anterior to the thalamus, and it is also anterior to the third ventricle. And then we can say that it lies posterior to the lateral terminalis and the anterior commissure, and also lies superior. We can say that it lies superior to the tuba cinerum, and it also lies superior to the interpendicular fossa. Now, I also mentioned from our previous lecture that we normally have 4 groups of hypothalamic nuclei, and I'll quickly represent that on the board for better understanding. Now, the hypothalamic nuclei consists of the preoptic group, we have the supraoptic group, and then we have the tuberoid group and the mammillary group. Like I mentioned earlier in our previous video, that the preoptic group contains the preoptic nucleus. Then I also mentioned that the supraoptic group contains the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the supraoptic nucleus, the paraventricular nucleus, and the anterior nucleus. This is the suprachiasmatic nucleus, this is the supraventricular nucleus, this is the paraventricular nucleus, and then this is our anterior hypothalamic nucleus. Then, I also mentioned that the tuberoid group contains 3 nuclei. The nuclei are the aquate nucleus, and then we have the ventromedial nucleus, and then we also have the dorsomedial nucleus. And then in the mammillary region, we have the mammillary nucleus, and we also have another one which is called the posterior hypothalamic nucleus. Now let's talk about the blood supply of the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is actually supplied by the anterior cerebral artery and its communicating branches, the middle cerebral artery and its communicating branches, and then the posterior cerebral artery and its communicating branches. So we have three major arteries and their communicating branches that actually supply the hypothalamus. They are the anterior cerebral arteries and its communicating branches, the middle cerebral arteries and its communicating branches, and the posterior cerebral arteries and its communicating branches. Now let's talk about the functions of the hypothalamus. Now when we talk about the functions of the hypothalamus has three major functions. And one of them is that it has an involvement with the autonomic nervous system. And that is to say that it has an autonomic function. And we can also say that it actually has an effect on both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. The second function is that the hypothalamus has an endocrine function. And that is to say that it has an involvement with the endocrine system. Number three is that the hypothalamus has a limbic function. Now, the hypothalamus is at the center of the limbic system. We can say that it is the epicenter of the limbic system, and as such, it has a limbic function. Now, in our last video, we talked about the limbic function of the hypothalamus. In this video, we are going to talk about the endocrine function of the hypothalamus and the autonomic function of the hypothalamus. Now, in talking about the endocrine function of the hypothalamus, the first nucleus we are going to consider is the aquate nucleus. The aquate nucleus. Now, the aquate nucleus is responsible for producing, releasing hormone and inhibiting hormone. Now, these hormones, this releasing hormone and inhibiting hormone are produced by the aquate nucleus in the hypothalamus, and then this hormone is released into the anterior pituitary through what we call the hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system. It releases these hormones into this portal system, and then these hormones come to the anterior pituitary to stimulate some cells, and then when these cells are stimulated, they also produce their own hormones. Now, one of the hormones that aquate nucleus usually produces is growth hormone releasing hormone. When it produces growth hormone releasing hormone, the hormone goes into the portal system and then finds its way into the anterior pituitary and stimulates the somatotrophs. When the somatotrophs are stimulated, it results in the production of growth hormone. And you know that growth hormone is involved in the general growth of tissues and cells. Now, the aquate nucleus can also release growth hormone inhibitory hormone. When growth hormone inhibitory hormone is produced, it can actually inhibit the somatotrophs from producing growth hormone. Now, another hormone that is produced by the aquate nucleus is the corticotropin releasing hormone. The corticotropin releasing hormone actually stimulates the corticotrophs to produce ACTH. ACTH is known as adrenocorticotropic hormone. Now, ACTH goes down to the adrenal cortex and brings about the production of cortisol. Now, another hormone that is produced by aquate nucleus is known as prolactin inhibitory hormone. Now, prolactin inhibitory hormone actually goes down to the anterior pituitary to stimulate the lactotrophs. When the lactotrophs are stimulated, it inhibits the production of prolactin, and we know that prolactin is involved in milk production. Now, another hormone that is produced by the aquate nucleus is known as the thyroid releasing hormone. Thyroid releasing hormone stimulates the thyrotrophs to release thyroid stimulating hormone, which acts on the thyroid gland to produce T3 and T4. Nucleus. The preoptic nucleus is a sexually dimorphic nucleus. Now, the preoptic nucleus actually has different effects in both males and females. Now, the preoptic nucleus actually produces gonadotropin releasing hormone. The gonadotropin release hormone actually stimulates the gonadotrophs to release follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Now, in females, the follicle-stimulating hormone results in the production of estrogen, and the luteinizing hormone results in the production of progesterone. And both hormones are actually involved in the development of female sexual characteristics. Now, secondly, in males, follicle-stimulating hormones actually bring about spermatogenesis, and also luteinizing hormone actually bring about the production of testosterone. And of course, we know that testosterone has an involvement in the development of male sexual characteristics. Now, another nucleus that we'll talk about is the supraoptic nucleus. The supraoptic nucleus is usually stimulated by decrease in ECM volume and also by an increase in plasma osmolality. Now, when there is decrease in ECM volume and increase in plasma osmolality, the supraoptic nucleus is stimulated. When the supraoptic nucleus is stimulated, it results in the production of ADH. And it does that via a tract that is known as the hypothalamus-hypophyseal tract. Now, ADH has an effect on the blood vessels. It actually brings about vasoconstriction, and then it also has an effect on the kidney. It stimulates the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct and bring about water reabsorption. Now, in the collecting duct, there is a receptor that is known as the V2 receptors. Now, when these receptors are stimulated, it results in an increase in the permeability of the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting ducts. And when that happens, it results in the reabsorption of water. The reabsorption of water results in an increase in the ECM volume. An increase in ECM volume results in an increase in blood pressure. Also, increase in ECM volume also solves the problem by decreasing plasma osmolality. Another nucleus we'll talk about is the paraventricular nucleus. Now, the paraventricular nucleus is actually stimulated by suckling, and it is also stimulated by uterine contraction. Now, when the baby suckles the mother, there are some touch receptors, especially around the nipples. When these touch receptors are stimulated, it sends a barrage of information to the hypothalamus. When this information gets to the hypothalamus, it stimulates the paraventricular nucleus, which releases oxytocin. Now, oxytocin stimulates the myoepithelial cells and bring about the release of milk. We call this reflex the milk letdown reflex. Now, another implication of the paraventricular nucleus is during parturition. Now, during parturition, when there is uterine contraction, it sends impulses to the hypothalamus, which stimulates the paraventricular nucleus to produce oxytocin. When oxytocin is produced, it goes down to the uterus and brings about uterine contraction, and of course, uterine contraction will enhance parturition. Now, it is important to know that both the supraoptic nucleus and the paraventricular nucleus actually sends down information to the posterior pituitary via a tract that is known as the hypothalamus-hypophyseal portal tract. And then the aqueous nucleus actually releases its hormone via a portal system that is known as the hypothalamus-hypophyseal portal system. Now, another nucleus we'll talk about is the suprachiasmatic nucleus. The suprachiasmatic nucleus has an involvement with the circadian rhythm. Now, when light actually strikes the retina, it sends an information via an optic tract down to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. When the suprachiasmatic nucleus is stimulated, there is a connection between the suprachiasmatic nucleus and the pineal gland. So, information is sent from the suprachiasmatic nucleus down to the pineal gland to release what is known as melatonin. And of course, melatonin is implicated in circadian rhythm. So, lesion to the suprachiasmatic nucleus can actually result in what is known as insomnia. Now, let's talk about the autonomic function of the hypothalamus. Autonomic function of the hypothalamus. Now, hypothalamus is modulated by the anterior hypothalamic nucleus and the posterior hypothalamic nucleus. Now, let's talk about the involvement of the anterior hypothalamic nucleus. Now, the anterior hypothalamic nucleus sends down the fiber that is known as the dorsal longitudinal fasciculus. Now, as this fiber goes down the brainstem, it connects with the reticular formation of the brainstem and also connects with the cranial nerve nucleus that are involved in the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, what do they look like that has an involvement with the parasympathetic nervous system is the Edinburgh-Westphal nucleus. Now, when Edinburgh-Westphal nucleus is actually stimulated, it results in pupillary constriction. Another nucleus that is actually connected with the dorsal longitudinal fasciculus is known as the superior salivary nucleus. And the superior salivary nucleus actually has an involvement with the facial nerve, which is the cranial nerve 7. Another nucleus is the inferior salivary nucleus, which has an involvement with cranial nerve 9. Also, it has an involvement or a connection with the vagus nerve, particularly the dorsal nucleus of the vagus nerve. Another nucleus is a nucleus of tractus solitarius. Now, the nucleus of tractus solitarius, when stimulated, sends an information to the hypothalamus to apprise the anterior hypothalamic nucleus of taste sensation. Now, the anterior hypothalamic nucleus also sends down fibers that actually goes down to the preganglionic parasympathetic nervous system of the sacral region, which is actually S2 to S4 region. Now, for the posterior hypothalamic nucleus, the posterior hypothalamic nucleus sends down fibers that goes down to the thoracolumbar region, which is the preganglionic sympathetic nervous system. And of course, it has an involvement with the T1 to L2 region of the spinal cord. Now, another function of the anterior hypothalamic nucleus and the posterior hypothalamic nucleus is that they are involved in thermoregulation. Now, the anterior hypothalamic nucleus actually decreases temperature. And it does that by vasodilation, and it also does that by sweating. Now, the posterior hypothalamic nucleus actually increases temperature, and it does that by vasoconstriction and by shivering. Now, let's talk about the connections of the hypothalamus. There is a connection between the amygdala and the hypothalamus. Now, that connection is known as the striatum terminalis. Also, there is another connection between the amygdala and the hypothalamus, and that connection is known as the ventral amygdalofugal pathway. Now, there is a connection between the hippocampus and the hypothalamus. That connection is via a white tract that is known as the fornix. The fornix actually connects the hippocampus with the mammillary body of the hypothalamus. Also, there's a connection between the frontal cortex and the hypothalamus. That connection is known as the cortico-hypothalamic tract. Also, there's a connection between the frontal cortex, the septal area. That connection goes down to the reticular formation. Now, this connection is actually called the median forebrain bundle. There's another connection between the mammillary body and the anterior hypothalamic nuclei. That connection is actually known as the mammillothalamic tract. And also there's a connection between the mammillary body and the tegmental area of the midbrain. That connection is known as the mammillategmental tract. Also there's a connection between the hypothalamus and the posterior pituitary. That connection is known as the hypothalamus-hypophyseal tract. Also there's a connection between the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. That connection is known as the hypothalamus-hypophyseal portal system. Also, there's a connection between the hypothalamus and the thoracolumbar portion of the spinal cord. That connection is known as the hypothalamus-spinal tract. And also, there's a connection between the hypothalamus and the craniosacral region of the spinal cord. That connection is via a fiber that is called the dorsal longitudinal fasciculus.